Hello, everyone, and welcome into the Star Wars Legends Lounge, the show that celebrates the books from Star Wars Legends. I'm Aaron Moats. Well, it's now February, the shortest month of the year, the month of my birth, and most importantly, the start of spring training in Major League Baseball. That's right, pitchers and catchers report to camp in the middle of the month, while position players report to camp 5 or 6 days later. Hope springs eternal for most fan bases, and of course for my Baltimore Orioles, I expect a better season than what we got last year. Now, will that be tough? Absolutely. But the O's have lost their last 8 playoff games. The last 3 regular seasons have been really fun, mostly, but the postseason has been a completely different story. For me, it's time for the Orioles to take the next step and start making some noise in the postseason. Now, I'm not saying they need to win the World Series or anything. Of course, I'd love that. But how about just winning one series? How about advancing to the ALCS? The fan base is starting to get impatient. But we're still a few weeks away from spring training games starting, listener. And you didn't tune in to hear me talk about that anyway. You want me to talk about today's Legends book. It's the first of the classic Star Wars stories from the Lando Calrissian adventures from 1983. The young gambler crisscrosses the galaxy from seedy cantinas to upscale casinos, trying to make his fortune playing sabacc. But Lando takes a bad bet in the Rafa system and ends up getting conned into searching for an ancient artifact. An artifact that could reshape the balance of power in the system. It's Lando Calrissian and the Mindharp of Sharu by L. Neil Smith. And I'll talk about the book coming up in just a few minutes. But first, it's listener question time. I have 2 emails today. The first comes from Morgan Sable, who has 2 questions for me. They ask, if you were Thraken Sal Solo, would you pretend to be Han, since they look alike? Do you think Han finds out who his parents were? And does Luke find out who his mom is? Well, thank you very much for the questions, Morgan Sable. Yes, if I was Thraken Sal Solo, considering how much I look like hero of the galaxy, Han Solo, I would absolutely pretend to be my cousin Han in certain situations. Think about it. Within the Corellian system, maybe 100 people at the most have ever stood in front of Han Solo long enough to really know what he looks like. For the vast majority of people, they only know what Han looks like from holo videos, from posters, from Republic propaganda, from Imperial wanted posters. From everything we have read about Thraken Sal Solo and Han, they look almost like identical twins, with Thraken being a little older and just a little heavier than Han. So, if I was Thraken, let's say, hypothetically, it was almost dinner time and I didn't feel like cooking, I want to go out to eat, and I want to go to the hot new restaurant in Coronet City. You know, one of those places where you can't get into because you can't get a reservation for 6 months. Now, would I show up, say I was hero of the galaxy, Han Solo? I've returned to my home planet on business from the New Republic, from my wife, Chief of State, Leia Organa, and I'm feeling a little hungry, and I just want to get dinner. Maybe I'm saying I would not be above doing that for a good meal. As for Luke learning who his mother is, people all the time say one of the things they want to see in Star Wars is the conversation that Luke has with Ahsoka Tano. Maybe Leia's there. A lot of times you don't hear people say Leia's there, but I always imagine Luke and Leia are there, and they want to hear Ahsoka Tano talk to Luke about Anakin. They want her to bring Anakin to life for Luke and Leia. And I want that too. But what I want even more is during that conversation with Ahsoka Tano, for her to tell Luke and Leia about their mother, Padme. And I want Luke and Leia to talk to Mon Mothma and have Mon Mothma talk to the twins about their mother, Padme. It's something that I've always wanted since we learned who the Skywalker twins' mother was in the prequel trilogy. So, Morgan Sable, I'm saying my fingers are crossed. It's something I want. It's something I've always wanted. I think Lucasfilm knows that these are two things that the fans want. They want the Skywalker twins to be told about their father and their mother. They're saving it for something big. I don't know what that is, but I can only guess that they are saving that for something really big. Now, today's second question comes from the Jedi Librarian, who says, "Hello, Aaron. I love listening to the podcast. I grew up reading the EU, and I've recently started listening to the audiobook versions of some of the books. I prefer listening to the unabridged ones that are read by Mark Thompson. Do you have a favorite audiobook and narrator? If so, why?" Thank you very much for the question, Jedi Librarian. I admit I rarely listen to audiobooks, mostly because I find that my mind starts wandering and I miss a lot of stuff, and all of a sudden 5 minutes has gone by and I don't know where we are in the story and I have to rewind it. But I do listen to some. And when I do listen to an audiobook, I like listening to it while I read the book at the same time. So it's like reading with character voices and sound effects. Generally, I like the canon audiobooks more than the Legends audiobooks. I know they have gone back and started re-recording Legends audiobooks in the unabridged version. When I was growing up, I did have a couple abridged books on tape. I'll always remember I wore out The Crystal Star. That book on tape lasted like 3 hours total. So I have listened to some of them, but I haven't listened to many. The ones I have listened to, my favorites are the canon Alphabet Squadron audiobooks. The first book, Alphabet Squadron, is read by Saskia Marleveld. The second, Shadowfall, is read by Carol Monda, which is probably my favorite story of the trilogy. And the final book, Victory's Price, is read by January Lavoie. I really enjoy the performances of all three narrators, but, I think Mark Thompson, Jonathan Davis, Keeler Lee, all of the people that read Star Wars audiobooks do a great job. The reason I like the Alphabet Squadron audiobooks so much are the sound effects and the musical score. They really go into it in those three books. It puts you in the cockpit right there with the fighter pilots or down on the ground with the troops. To me, they're just really, really immersive audiobooks. Thanks again for the questions, Morgan Sable and the Jedi Librarian. Now, listener, if you'd like me to answer a question on the podcast, send me an email at swlegendslounge@gmail.com or send me a message on Twitter, Instagram, or Blue Sky at swlegendslounge. And if you'd like to get your voice on the show, just record a short message and email it in. Just please record it in MP3 audio format. Now, coming up at the end of the show, we'll once again hear from the Jedi Librarian, who has some opinions about two things in the new Jedi Order book, Agents of Chaos 1, Hero's Trial. You'll want to stay tuned for that. But now, it's time for today's book, Lando Calrissian and the Mindharp of Sharu by L. Neil Smith. Grab yourself a drink. Let's head in to the Star Wars Legends Lounge. The story begins in the Ocean system, where Lando Calrissian finds himself in a cantina playing sabacc. The young gambler has just recently won himself a ship named the Millennium Falcon, and now he needs some credits to fix it up and to learn how to fly it. Lando quickly figures out that today's opponents aren't really on his level when it comes to sabacc. They're just local townfolk who like to play and put down a little wager from time to time. The gambler plays strategically, allowing the others to take the smaller hands while he slowly, methodically builds up his winnings. Now, during the game, Lando is cordial and he chit-chats with the other players. One of them tells Lando about riches in the neighboring Rafa sector, life crystals which are extremely valuable, and a highly advanced extinct race called the Sharu. After hearing about the valuable life crystals, Lando busts the other players and rakes in his winnings. That includes a marker for a droid, which he can pick up once he travels to the planet Rafa 4. Lando leaves the Ocean system and heads to the Rafa system. He plans to pick up a shipment of the life crystals and sell the droid for credits. When he arrives at Rafa 4, Lando finds one of the oddest droids he's ever seen. A strange, 5-sided, chrome-plated droid named Vufi Ra, who stands about waist-high and spouts 5 organic-looking tentacles instead of mechanical arm-like structures. After picking up Vufi Ra, Lando is beaten and arrested by the local constabulary. They take him in front of the governor, a man named Dutus Mur, and a strange man named Rokar Gepta, who says he's a sorcerer of Tund, a secretive sect of dark side force users who are highly skilled at deception and casting illusions. Gepta and Mur order Lando to go to the planet Rafa 5 and search for the Mindharp of Sharu, an artifact that reportedly will give the owner power over the system, including the native people, the Toka. The Toka are a primitive, downtrodden humanoid race who are used as servants and slaves in the Rafa system. Gepta gives Lando something he calls the Key, a miniature version of the Mindharp that Gepta says will lead Lando to the artifact. Mur sets Lando free to go to Rafa 5, but the governor warns him that the Falcon's hyperdrive has been deactivated, ensuring Lando can't skip out and leave the Rafa system. Lando and Vufi Ra prepare to leave Rafa 4 when they meet one of the Toka named Mose, who says he's the high singer of his people. Mose tells Lando that Toka lore predicted Lando's coming, the key-bearer of legend who will find the Mindharp. Lando decides to bring Mose along with them, hoping the Toka songs will show Lando and Vufi Ra how to find the Mindharp. But when they land at the foot of the Great Sharu Pyramid on Rafa 5, Mose and a group of Toka ambush the Falcon. They capture Lando and shoot Vufi Ra with crossbow bolts, seemingly killing the droid. Mose and the Toka march Lando to an area several kilometers away from the Falcon. They strip him and tie him to one of the life crystal trees. But they don't take the key. Mose says they can't. The legends say the Toka cannot physically take the key from the key bearer. But the legends say the Toka are not allowed to kill the key bearer. However, they have to wait until the bearer is dead. Then they can take the key off his body. Mose says the life crystals can kill the key bearer. That's why Lando is tied to one of the life crystal trees, to allow the crystals to slowly drain away his life energy. Lando sits there, slowly dying from exposure, and suffers strange dreams and visions. Meanwhile, back at the Falcon, Vufi Ra sits up. The droid pulls the crossbow bolts out of its body and reclaims some of the fluids that have leaked out onto the ground. the little droid repairs itself to the point where it trundles up the Falcon's ramp and lifts off in search of Lando. After several hours and suffering from frostbite, Lando frees himself from the life crystal tree. Soon after, Vufi Ra lands and the two fly back to the Great Pyramid. Mose is there, sitting on the ground. The High Singer welcomes Lando, saying the gambler passed his test, freeing himself from the life crystal tree. Lando is angry and skeptical, but he allows Mose to join them to explore the base of the pyramid. Eventually, the group finds a slot in the pyramid's outer wall. After talking it over with Vufi Ra about what they should do, Lando places the key in the slot, and nothing happens. Lando turns and asks Mose what's going on. But the High Singer says there aren't any Toka songs about entering the pyramid. Lando doesn't believe Mose. He turns back to ask Vufi Ra about what it thinks they should do. But the droid is gone. It's disappeared. Lando turns back to confront Mose, but the High Singer has also disappeared. Confused, Lando looks back to where he used the key and suddenly finds himself inside the pyramid. The structure seems even more enormous on the inside than it did outside. Lando looks around, but Vufi Ra and Mose are nowhere to be seen. Lando, Vufi Ra, and Mose all experience a weird, disorienting trip through the pyramid. The little droid finds itself in an enclosed room. It investigates the walls around the room and finds a spot where it can simply walk through the wall. Vufi Ra finds itself in another room. Again, there's a spot where the droid can walk through. It happens again and again, over and over and over and over. For hours, Vufi Ra walks from room to room, searching for Lando and looking for a way to escape the pyramid. Now, the journey is different for Mose. It's more spiritual than physical. Instead of walking around, the High Singer sits and begins to contemplate the Sharu and his beliefs. Amazingly, the primitive Toka's mental capacity starts to expand. But it comes at a cost. The loss of his eyes. They're just gone. Oddly, Mose doesn't seem to care about the loss of his eyes, because now he can understand everything. Lando searches around for his companions, but he can't find them. What he can see is outside. The wall of the pyramid seems translucent. Lando can see the desert, the sun, and the Millennium Falcon. But it's like looking through water. Lando tests the wall. He finds that he can push his hand through it, but somehow it's still solid. Lando continues to experiment with the wall when he hears a laugh. It's Mose. The High Singer is sitting right there on the ground behind him. When Lando looks down at the floor, he sees a tiny insect scurrying around. Except it's not an insect. It's Vufi Ra. The little droid is minuscule and appears to be moving around twice as fast as Lando is. Lando picks up Vufi Ra, and after a brief exchange, the two discover that they're experiencing time differently. From Lando's point of view, he's only been inside the pyramid for a few minutes. But for Vufi Ra, it's been almost 20 hours. But at least now they've reunited. So, the three head toward the middle of the pyramid. The closer they get to the center of the pyramid, the more Lando and Vufi Ra return closer to their normal sizes, and they begin experiencing time normally again. Finally, they enter a vault at the center of the pyramid. There, they find the Mindharp, sitting high on a dais. But something's not right. Mose has just vanished again. Lando and Vufi Ra see pictures along the walls depicting the Sharu, the heights of their power, and then nothing. The pictures showing the Sharu and their entire civilization just stop. Lando and Vufi Ra discuss what they should do, but after talking it over, they don't see any other way to get out of the pyramid and escape the Rafa system. So, Lando climbs the stairs and lifts the Mindharp off the dais. Lando and Vufi Ra find themselves outside the pyramid, but they aren't on Rafa 5 anymore. Somehow, they've been transported back to the streets of Rafa 4. Suddenly, Vufi Ra betrays Lando. He cries out for the police to arrest the gambler. Lando is brought straight to Governor Mur's office, where the governor tells him that Lando has been missing for 4 months. But no matter, now that he's back with the Mindharp, Mur can send the gambler to work the life crystal orchards and use the artifact to control all the mines in the system. What about Rukar Gepta? Lando asks. Mur says the sorcerer just recently grew tired of waiting for Lando to return and headed off to find him on Rafa 5. Lando is dragged away from the governor's office right as Mur decides to strum the Mindharp. Almost instantly, the ground begins to shake. The winds begin to howl. It's chaos in the streets as people try to find safety. Out of nowhere, the Millennium Falcon arrives. It's Vufi Ra. The little droid apologizes for betraying Lando. It explains that the governor programmed it to turn the gambler in when they returned to Rafa 4. However, now that it has fulfilled its programming, Vufi Ra is free to make its own choices, and that means choosing to save Lando. Mose is also on board the Falcon. The High Singer explains that with the strumming of the Mindharp, the Sharu have returned. That's right. The Toka are the ancient Sharu. Mose says that thousands of years ago, some unknown threat frightened the Sharu so much that they gave up all of their technology and forced themselves to become primitive again. But now that the governor has played the Mindharp, Mose says the hidden underground Sharu cities are beginning to rise up, and the intelligence of the Toka is being restored. The story ends with Lando and Vufi Ra fleeing the Rafa system. The cargo hold of the Falcon is filled with valuable life crystals, while the entire system is transformed by earthquakes and the ancient Sharu buildings reemerging. In the space between Rafa 4 and Rafa 5, Rokar Gepta spots the Falcon escaping. The loss of the Mindharp enrages Gepta, and the Tund sorcerer swears he'll hunt down the ship and get his revenge on Lando Calrissian. It's time to take a break. When we return, I'll talk more about Lando Calrissian and the Mindharp of Sharu. I'm Aaron Moats. Stay tuned. You're listening to the Star Wars Legends Lounge. Thank you for listening to the Star Wars Legends Lounge, where we celebrate the books from Star Wars Legends. But let me take a moment and recommend a book from Star Wars canon. Thrawn is a story full of smugglers, pirates, and political infighting. See how the brilliant Chiss tactician climbed his way up the ranks of the Imperial Navy, with a little help from his reluctant aide, Eli Vanto. Check out Thrawn by Timothy Zahn. Welcome back to the Star Wars Legends Lounge, the show that celebrates the books from Star Wars Legends. I'm Aaron Moats, and today I'm talking about the novel Lando Calrissian and the Mindharp of Sharu by L. Neil Smith, the first of the 3 Lando Calrissian adventures. These stories were originally published back in 1983, the same year that Return of the Jedi hit the theaters. It tells the story of Lando Calrissian before we meet him in The Empire Strikes Back. Lando has just recently won the Millennium Falcon in a sabacc game, and now Lando wins a droid, Vufi Ra. I really enjoy these stories. They have certain things in them that I'm not keen on, but these stories are fun. These stories move. They're not really full-fledged novels. In the mass market paperback version that I have, this first story is only about 145 pages. Now, the print is a little smaller than normal, so if it was a normal size print, I bet this would be somewhere between 175 and 200 pages long. Basically a short novel. And it's a fun read. It's a really quick read. I think I got through this story in about 4 days, maybe 5 days. I think one of my favorite parts of the story is we get a lot of young Lando's personality. It's both the same and a little different from the Lando we see in the original trilogy. It is very much like Donald Glover's portrayal of Lando Calrissian in Solo: A Star Wars Story. He's brash. He's a little arrogant. But he's really clever. In this story, he's really, really smart. We got the cleverness in Solo. I don't really think we got to how smart Lando is, but I am hopeful we get that in the reported Lando Calrissian movie sometime in the future. But the way Lando's intelligence is depicted in this story, I think, fits right along with the way we see Lando in Timothy Zahn's Scoundrels that I talked about last year, if you remember, with Scott, one of the guest co-hosts on the show. Some of my favorite parts of how Lando is depicted in these books are when he uses the skills that he has developed as a gambler in reading people, how they hold themselves, a twitch of the eye, a gulp, a little bit of a nervous tick, a slight smile. Lando can read people, and in that, they become predictable to him. It takes him a little while. He doesn't know exactly what someone's going to do in the first few minutes that he meets them, but after observing them for a while, he can predict outcomes of situations. And he's been around enough people throughout the galaxy, in seedy cantinas, in big casinos, that even if he meets someone for the first time, he can kind of get a read on them. He does that with Governor Mir in this story, where the governor has had him beaten and dragged in front of him. There's not even really any charges that they're holding Lando on. They're trumped up. They say that he has stolen something. Everyone knows he has not stolen anything. But it's to get Lando in front of the governor. And Lando is a little bit snide. He's pretty sarcastic. He doesn't want to give the governor anything to think that he's actually afraid in this situation. He's afraid of giving the governor too much leverage. But what he can do is keep him talking. And as the governor explains to Lando what is going to happen to him when he is found guilty of this trumped up crime, that he is going to be sentenced to working in the life crystal orchards where most people eventually die an early death. Lando sees something that he can use in the discussion, and he turns the discussion into his favor. He notices something that tells him, I can use the governor's greed against him. And that's what he does. If Lando was not a gambler, he'd be an excellent interrogator. He'd be an excellent psychiatrist because, as I said, he can read people. That's why when we see him in the movies and in future novels and comic books, he's known as an excellent gambler and con artist. The second thing I really like about the story is Vufi Ra, the droid. Most of you know I don't really care one way or another about the droids outside of R2-D2 and C-3PO. But you can tell there is something different about Vufi Ra. This is one of the very few times where the discussion around droid sentience is interesting for me. For the most part, I find that discussion tedious. But there is something different about Vufi Ra. The reader can tell that Vufi Ra probably isn't 100% droid. At least some part of Vufi Ra is actually alive. And while it talks about its programming, Vufi Ra also seems to have at least some sort of organic mind. You don't get much from Vufi Ra in this story. Now, I have read these Lando Calrissian adventures 2 or 3 times in the past growing up. So Lando and Vufi Ra have 2 more adventures, and I know where the story is going. But listener, if this is the first time you've been exposed to the Mindharp of Sharu, or if you want to read this story in the future, just know that the story of Vufi Ra gets much more complex. Starting in the next story, but most especially in the final one. Also, Rokor Gepta, the Sorcerer of Tund, is not in this book much, but he becomes the villain of these adventures. He becomes much more involved in tracking down Lando and Vufi Ra, trying to get his revenge for them not turning the Mindharp over to Rokor Gepta. So all in all, this story I just find really fun. Again, there are a few things that don't work for me. I'm not big on stories that involve strange passages of time. I don't like time travel at all. Thankfully, you don't really get that in this story. But the way that Lando and Vufi Ra experience time differently, yes, it's not something that I like that much, but it is a very small portion of the story. The other thing that I'm not too keen on is how the Mindharp is seemingly magical. I'm not as big of a fan of some of the higher fantasy stories. And for me, that's what I associate magic with. How they just instantaneously enter the pyramid. How all three of them disappear from one another and then just reappear with each other. Lando is as large as a building, while Vufi Ra seems to be as small as a spider. It's got a little Alice in Wonderland in it, with the sizes going up and down. And then when they finally get to the Mindharp at the end, as soon as Lando picks it up off of its stand on the dais, they are instantly out of the pyramid and back on a different planet, Rafa 4. And they're informed that it's 4 months later, even though, story-wise, it's only been about 5 days. That kind of thing I'm not too keen on, but it's not really a focus in this story. The focus of this story is learning the character of young Lando, seeing how he uses the skills that he has cultivated as a gambler and con man, and the beginning of his relationship with Vufi Ra. Those are the strengths of the story. And honestly, if I remember correctly, those are the strengths of the 2 remaining stories in the Lando Calrissian adventures. Are these stories of another time? Absolutely. Can these stories influence stories about Lando Calrissian in the future, in canon? Well, we at least see it a little bit in Solo, a Star Wars Story, where Donald Glover's Lando is dictating his memoir and throws out the name of the second book in this series, Lando Calrissian and the Flame Wind of Ossian. Could we see any other influences from this book in the future? The future of the Lando Calrissian movie? I think that depends. Is it possible that in a young Lando story, we see Vufi Ra either before Lando has L3, the droid we see in Solo, or Lando and L3 meet Vufi Ra somewhere? Sure, it's possible. But the thing I want to see Lando reading people the way he does in these Legends stories, both at the sabacc table and anywhere else this movie takes him. That's what I want to see. Well, it's almost time to go. But before I do, I've got another message from the Jedi Librarian, who says, in the beginning of the new Jedi Order book, Agents of Chaos 1, Hero's Trial, the Solos and Skywalkers are on Kashyyyk for Chewie's funeral. After the funeral, Han is told that both Loie and Waru will be taking over Chewbacca's life debt. Han unsuccessfully objects, saying that the life debt was fulfilled when Chewie died on Serpendal, saving Anakin's life. We never hear about this again in the books. Now, Loie is a Jedi, so he wouldn't really have been able to continue the life debt since he would be busy with his Jedi duties. Maybe he could continue the life debt duties whenever he isn't busy with the Jedi. Since Loie has Jedi duties, continuing the life debt would become Waru's responsibility. But we don't ever hear about Waru traveling around with Han and Leia. Also, we never hear about the Noghri continuing to protect Lady Vader. I don't think that they would have stopped protecting her after she became Jedi trained by Saba. Thank you very much for the email, Jedi Librarian. Those are 2 good points. I don't like to give my opinions in this part of the show, but I will say the Wookiee life debt to Han does continue for a few more years, although it isn't really written much about. And the Noghri do continue to travel with and protect Leia. I will actually be talking about that in a few episodes coming up later this year. Listener, if you have something you'd like to share with me, a question, an opinion, a character grouping, or a comment that you'd like me to read on the show, you can email me at swlegendslounge@gmail.com or send me a message on Twitter, Instagram, or Blue Sky at swlegendslounge. Now, coming up on the next episode, we continue with the Lando Calrissian adventures with the second book, Lando Calrissian and the Flame Wind of Ossian by L. Neil Smith. Now, that episode is scheduled for release on February 21st. However, don't hold me firm to that date, listener. I have a surgery coming up soon on my lower back. I need to get 2 vertebrae fused together. Hopefully, I'll be far enough on my recovery that I can record that episode and release it on its scheduled date on the 21st. But like I said, listener, don't hold that date as firm. Again, if you would like to see a full schedule for 2025, you can check out the posts that are pinned on my Blue Sky and Twitter pages. And you can see all the books I plan to read this year. Once again, thank you so much for listening to the Star Wars Legends Lounge. I'm Aaron Moats. May the Force be with you. And remember, there's always a bit of truth in Legends.